Number 10. MILTON STORCH. In a deeply disturbing act of violence caught on camera, two women got into a fist fight at a bodega in Far Rockaway, Queens one morning this year, with no apparent concern for the safety of nearby bystanders. 59-year-old MILTON STORCH, who suffered from limited mobility, was seated on his walker just enjoying the early morning sunrise outside the store when the brawl broke out. Surveillance footage showed that the women had started arguing inside the store, but it's unclear what the disagreement was about since the camera didn't record audio. Soon enough, they were throwing punches and ripping at each other's wigs as the fight was pushed outside. Several bystanders tried to separate the two, but the rivals were determined to keep going at it. One of the women got into her car as the other kept trying to pummel her. She then backed up, repositioned the vehicle, and stepped on the gas in an attempt to run her opponent over. The vehicle drove onto the sidewalk and slammed into Mr. Storch, knocking him off his walker and trapping him between the vehicle and the building. To make matters even worse, the woman calmly drove away, as if nothing had happened at all. Storch later died from his injuries, while another victim was taken to the hospital and was expected to make it. His roommate, Jose Rodriguez, told the New York Daily News that Storch often hung out in the neighborhood by the local shops. Authorities arrested 26-year-old Kiani Phoenix in connection to the incident. Her lawyer, Marvin Kornberg, claims the woman was fighting with the sister of her abusive, estranged boyfriend and that his client is psychologically traumatized from the relationship, as if that somehow mitigates the gravity of her alleged crime. Community members, on the other hand, are hoping Storch gets the justice he deserves. Number 9. Brendan Bear Clark. In 2019, a 43-year-old car mechanic named Brendan Bear Clark was working on a customer's vehicle at their property in New South Wales, Australia, when he went to grab a tool from a nearby shed and came face-to-face with a pair of 110-pound, 50-kilogram giant boar-hunting dogs. He barely had time to think or react to them before the massive canines each bit one of his arms and tackled him to the ground. It soon became clear to Clark that the dogs weren't just sending a warning, they were trying to kill him. He later told the Newcastle Herald that the alpha dog bit him in the face while going for his throat. Realizing that losing one limb was much better than dying, he gripped the dog's collar while it gnawed on his arm to keep it from getting close to his throat again. Clark then grabbed the other dog's collar and tried his best to strangle the canines to get them to stop chewing his arms, but he was too weak to do anything but hold on to their collars. At one point, he even tried playing dead in hopes the attack would stop, but it kept going. Speaking from his hospital bed, he spoke about his arm. "I could hear the bones breaking and the meat being ripped off. The brutal assault lasted a total of 90 minutes before the dog's owner saw what was going on and came to Clark's aid. By then, his right arm had been completely chewed off. Thankfully, he survived both the attack and an infection that threatened his life." Number 8. Jaylene Holton. At the end of a night out with friends in Philadelphia in 2022, 21-year-old Jaylene Holton and her friends walked into the path of some stray bullet shot by a disgruntled bar patron. They were at the Philly Bar and Restaurant when the senseless shooting happened, leaving Jaylene unconscious on the floor with a bullet wound to her head. She was then rushed to the hospital, where she died from her wounds. Another victim received treatment for injuries to his face caused by pieces of shattered glass. Everyone else at the scene was unharmed. Jaylene rarely went out, according to her family members. She was a homebody who lived on the straight and narrow and was simply acting as the designated driver for her group of friends that night. Police learned that the shooting stemmed from a fight between three men over a pool table. Employees eventually managed to kick one of the disruptive customers out. At least they thought they did. Instead, he went to his car to get a gun and fired 15 bullets into the restaurant from a little less than 200 feet, 61 meters away. Almost a week later, U.S. Marshals apprehended 47-year-old Anthony Nelson at a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and charged him with murder and several other crimes related to the bar shooting. He will also be prosecuted as a fugitive from justice for his decision to cross state lines and hide, instead of owning up to his alleged wrongdoings. Number 7. ASHLEE Diane McGill. 26-year-old ASHLEE Diane McGill was waiting for a ride home at a bus station in Portland, Oregon one morning earlier this year when she was suddenly mowed down by an out-of-control car. She died from her injuries and left behind a 6-year-old son. The driver of the car was street racing when he hit another vehicle, McGill, and then crashed into a tree. He was taken to the hospital with minor injuries. According to the latest update, no arrests have been made. Street racing has become a growing problem in Portland in the last few years, according to police, who told local station KOIN in 2020 that it was getting particularly bad in some areas. The same year, 58-year-old Joanne D. Martis died when two street racers crashed their cars into her truck. She was not involved in the race at all, just a bystander. Nearly 2 years later, in early 2022, law enforcement finally charged suspects Viktorovich Pavlov and McKinley James Faria with second-degree murder and negligent homicide for their role in her death. Number 6. Henry Reeves. While working beneath a vehicle at an auto garage in Johnson, Rhode Island way back in 1975, 31-year-old mechanic Henry Reeves saw 3 men walk into the shop. Moments later, one of them pulled out a gun and shot another man. They didn't notice Henry at the time, but he knew he needed to get out of the situation fast. He smacked the gunman across the shins with a wrench, forcing him to drop the weapon. Henry then grabbed the gun and fled the scene in his vehicle. The murder victim was later identified as the garage's owner, John Roderick. 5 people with suspected ties to organized crime were arrested in connection to his death. About a week after Roderick's murder, Henry mysteriously vanished. His younger sister, Christine Hodgkinson, told local news station WPRI in 2022 that her brother was on his way to a lawyer's office to discuss what he'd seen when he somehow disappeared. He never made it to the attorney's office to give his story. Henry's body was found 3 months after his disappearance in a wooded area. He had been shot 4 times from behind, and his van was found at a local scrapyard. His murder was never fully solved, leaving his loved ones without closure to this day. 47 years later, Johnson police are still encouraging members of the public to come forward with information in hopes of giving Henry's living loved ones some long-awaited justice. Number 5. Jamani Thompson. When 26-year-old Jamani Thompson left home to go to her shift as a baggage handler at the New Orleans International Airport one day in 2022, her mother never thought it would be the last time they saw each other. But it was, and she was hit with this tragic realization just hours later when she got a phone call saying her daughter had died in a horrific freak accident at work. Jamani's hair had gotten stuck in a conveyor while unloading baggage from a flight after it landed. Her co-workers tried to cut her loose but were unable to. She died from her injuries on the way to the hospital. An anonymous colleague who witnessed the incident told local news station WDSU that he couldn't get the image of Jamani's injuries out of his head. The ordeal left the young woman's co-workers and loved ones reeling as they struggled to make sense of something they would have never imagined was even possible. Number 4. Janine Balding. A 20-year-old bank teller named Janine Balding had just gotten off a train in Sydney, Australia after work one night back in 1988 and was walking to her car when a group of homeless youths came up to her. They asked her for the time as a way to distract her, then asked if she had any money or cigarettes, while one of the teens threatened her with a large knife. The group, made up of 5 males and 1 woman, forced Janine into the back seat of her car and then sped off. They drove for about an hour before stopping at an emergency pull-off and dragging her out of the vehicle. Janine was brutally assaulted multiple times and then thoughtlessly tossed into a dam where she drowned. Before leaving the scene, the killers took her jewelry and bank card. They fled in Janine's car, which broke down a little later, and continued their journey on foot. After selling her jewelry and withdrawing some cash using the stolen card, they went in different directions. When two of the teens turned themselves into police for an unrelated carjacking, they hinted that they had information about Janine's disappearance case. They ultimately led detectives to the body, and 5 suspects were charged with her murder. 3 of them received life sentences, including a 14-year-old who later became Australia's youngest suspect to ever get put away for life. The other 2, who didn't physically participate in Janine's murder, received sentences of 7.5 years and 19 months. The horrifying crime is a true example of someone simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Janine had no enemies to speak of and was just a nice, normal person, minding her business and going about life. She was engaged to be married and excited about the upcoming new chapter in her life. But sadly, her book was closed before she had the chance to live it. Number 3. One-way tragedy. 5 young friends were driving together on Florida's Palmetto Expressway one morning this year when a wrong-way driver hit them head-on going full speed. The young victims were just 18 to 25 years old. One of them, Giancarlo Arias, had recently received a scholarship to NYU, and the group was out celebrating his achievement when the tragic incident happened. The driver of the car that hit them was identified as Makey Simeon. He survived the crash and was airlifted to a nearby hospital with serious injuries. Simeon's lawyer was quick to point out that his client had a valid license at the time of the crash. He had a clean record other than 2 speeding tickets and a failure to yield offense. The attorney failed to mention, though, that Simeon had allegedly lost his license back in 2014 for driving 109 miles per hour, 175 kilometers per hour in a 70 mile per hour, 113 kilometers per hour speed zone. He eventually regained his driving privileges, but considering the circumstances surrounding the accident, it's concerning to know that he could be back out there driving on the road. Number 2. ANAYA Hernandez and RIVERA GUZMAN. 48-year-old RIVERA GUZMAN and his 24-year-old stepson, ANAYA Hernandez, were working together as landscapers in Northern Virginia one morning in 2022 when someone fatally shot them. Laura Hernandez told the Washington Post that she had just walked a few blocks with her husband and son on their way to work when she got a phone call less than 20 minutes later that the men were dead. Police have released very little information about the situation, but they have named a suspect in the case. 27-year-old Francis Deontay Rose was taken into custody on suspicion of burglary. He wasn't immediately charged with the men's murders, and it was unclear whether prosecutors planned to add more charges to his list. As the case made news headlines, it came to light that Rose had been released from custody a few months before the double homicide, after prosecutors dropped various drug and weapons charges against him. A judge ruled that the police had illegally searched him, leaving prosecutors with a weak case at best against Rose. It was also discovered that Rose had pleaded guilty and received probation for a 2019 gun charge in Washington, D.C., but he had failed to show up for recent probation hearings in the time leading up to Hernandez and Guzman's murders. He has also had numerous criminal cases against him dropped, which is very suspicious. It's hard to say at this point whether the victims' families will ever see true justice. Number 1. Randomly targeted senior seeks justice. A 78-year-old woman ordered an Access-a-Ride taxi one day in 2022 to help take her to her physio appointment. After leaving her home in Brooklyn, the woman ended up getting attacked by her driver. She became concerned when the vehicle drove past the address her appointment was scheduled to take place. They got into an argument over where she was supposed to get dropped off at when the driver allegedly refused to let her out of the car altogether, only to come to a screeching halt moments later. He then dragged her out of the vehicle by her leg. He took the elderly woman's money and phone when a Good Samaritan named Ezra Halawani, who had started video recording the scene, stepped in to defend her. The driver gave the phone back and got into his car. Halawani tried to follow the driver, but he sped off, hitting Halawani in the escape. Despite having his own injuries to deal with, he made sure the woman was in safe hands before leaving the scene. The NYPD said it was investigating this disturbing incident, but no arrests have been made as of now. Thanks for watching. What's something completely random or shocking that happened to you? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.